Unless you've been living under a rock, I'm sure you're all aware that Terence Crawford moved up 2 weight classes, I mean it was more like 3 weight classes, and beat the undisputed super middleweight king Canelo Alvarez. In doing so, Crawford became an undisputed champion in his 3rd weight class, something that anyone can appreciate is one of the greatest achievements in boxing history. But as you delve deeper into the boxing archives, there are some outrageous achievements that have been accomplished by some of the boxing greats. So I'm going to decide who has the greatest boxing achievement of all time. My judgment will be based on how easily this achievement could be replicated or even beaten, but the context surrounding the achievements in question is also important. So what that fighter went through to actually have that achievement is a key factor. I'm sure there's probably some bloke from the 1890s who managed to accumulate 130 knockout wins in a single year, which is obviously never going to be achieved again, but let's not lie to ourselves. The level of opposition pre-1930 is very questionable, so for that reason, the recency of the achievement is also a big factor. So let's get started. Coming in at number 10, we've got fighting across 5 decades. Being able to fight across 5 decades is an incredible display of longevity, which has been shown by only 3 fighters to my knowledge. The great Hands of Stone Roberto Duran, Kid Azteca, who was a legendary fighter as well, and someone who almost lessens this achievement kind of, and it was a guy named Saul Mambi. Some people might know who he is, some people might not. To be able to say you fought across 5 decades requires a professional fighting career of at least 31 years at the minimum. For example, Roberto Duran fought from 1968 to 2001, which is a career span of 33 years. Now, there will be fighters that fought for longer than this, but they don't have the accolade of fighting in 5 decades because they would have turned professional at the start of a new decade, meaning that they would have to maybe have a 40-year career to achieve this. So the reason that this is at number 10 is because it partly comes down to luck when you started your career, and it doesn't necessarily require you to be good, it just means you carry on fighting for a very long time. Obviously, I'm not saying this for Roberto Duran's case, he was also one of the all-time greats whilst doing it. Coming in at number 9, the most consecutive wins. Now this is one that seems like it should be higher up in the rankings because it's obviously never going to be beaten due to the sheer ridiculous quantity of fights, but this record did happen a very long time ago, so it does get penalised slightly. This record was officially achieved on the 7th of December 1914 when Jimmy Wilde, the Atomic Atom, won his 103rd consecutive fight. This is over 100 years ago, so the legitimacy of some of the wins and the level of opposition also prevents it from being higher on the list, and you can't always trust the recordings of documentation from that far ago. Coming in at number 8, we've got Simultaneously holding 3 belts in 3 different divisions. To my knowledge, only Henry Armstrong has achieved this, and he was undisputed at the time as well. He beat P.T. Sauron in 1937 to win the featherweight title. He beat Barney Ross in 1938 to win the welterweight title, so he'd already moved up 2 weight classes, and then moved down to lightweight the fight after to beat Lou Ambers to win the lightweight title. And back then there were no super versions of divisions, so every weight class was the equivalent of jumping 2 weight classes in today's boxing economy. And whilst it is an incredible achievement, a part of me hates it when a champion fights at a different weight to the belt that they hold. If you're not defending your belt and you're fighting for a new belt in a different weight, then you should vacate the belt that you're holding and let other people fight for it. This achievement is probably not going to be replicated or broken because the sanctioning bodies won't stand for it nowadays, and you would more than likely be stripped unless you're a big money draw like Canelo Alvarez. Not to mention that if you check BoxRec, the challenges were usually about £10 below the weight limit for the fights anyway. It's all well and good fighting for the welterweight belt, but it would be more impressive if you were actually fighting welterweights and not lightweights. Coming in at number 7, we've got winning 27 consecutive world title fights. This is a record that is currently held by the Brown Bomber Joe Louis, who lost his streak in 1950, so this record has stood for a grand total of 75 years. Because he was a heavyweight, all of these fights were at 1 weight class, and Louis was the champion in all of these fights, excluding the first of those fights against Jim Braddock in 1937. So not only is this 27 consecutive world title fights, it's also 26 consecutive world title defenses. You could argue it's more straightforward when you're fighting in the heaviest division because the champions in the lower weight classes would usually vacate their belts and move up in weight, and it's unlikely they'll be able to fight for a world title for their first fight in a new division. So whatever streak they might have been on gets reset, which is one of the reasons it's not higher. Another reason is because it looks like he's going to be beaten very soon by Naoya Inoue, who is going to be fighting in his 27th consecutive title fight this December. So assuming he wins that, he could definitely beat it. Nonetheless, to win that many title fights is a fantastic achievement, but the fact that it's consecutive doesn't really add much importance. It's not necessarily something that anyone is intentionally trying to go out of their way to beat. Don't hate me for saying this, but this achievement is just something that kind of happens. Coming in at number 6, we've got becoming a heavyweight champion at 20 years old. There has only been one person to become world heavyweight champion by the age of 20 years old, and that is obviously Iron Mike Tyson. He beat Trevor Berbick in 1986 to win the WBC belt, and subsequently went on his run to become undisputed. I think it's fair to say that we've been reminded with how impressive this achievement is due to the rise of Moses Atama, whose entire marketing campaign was that he was going to beat Mike Tyson's record and become the new, youngest heavyweight champion of all time. We all know now that's not possible, as Atama is now a few months older than Tyson was, and he hasn't even beaten a former world champion. The reason that this isn't higher on the list is because I do think it will be beaten one day in the near future by some kid that probably hasn't even turned pro yet. And it's not as if Tyson is ahead by a ridiculously long distance in terms of young heavyweight champions. Floyd Patterson was 21 and Muhammad Ali was 22. But looking at this from a different perspective, this is a record that has stood for almost 40 years now, and it's one that seems like it should be beatable, unlike the records from 100 years ago that rely on the more sheer quantity of fights the modern fighters don't appease to. So maybe I'm naive for believing it can be broken, and statistically, fighters are staying in the amateurs for longer now, meaning young champions are going to be more infrequent. So maybe this is an achievement that is going to stand the test of time. Coming in at number 5, we've got becoming the youngest ever world champion. In 1976, Wilfred Benitez beat Antonio Cervantes at super lightweight to become the youngest world champion in history at the age of 17 years and 176 days. Now, this seems harsh to put this in 5th position because it's an absolutely exceptional achievement, but unfortunately, there are 4 other accolades that I personally think rank higher. To put this into perspective, I want every one of you watching this right now to think about what you were doing when you were 17 years old. Because I think I know what I was doing, probably playing Call of Duty Black Ops 2 all day, and Wilfred Benitez was becoming a world champion boxer. And to add some context, this wasn't an easy belt to get. The guy he beat, Antonio Cervantes, was the guy at super lightweight, and he was in his prime as well. A part of me thinks this should be higher because I think it's going to be so difficult to beat this achievement, considering, like I've already said, a lot of boxers tend to turn pro later in life now, which I do think is a good thing. I'm not saying it's due to turning pro young, but Wilfred Benitez is now suffering from a degenerative brain condition due to the punishment he took in the ring, and I assume taking blows to the head at the age of 15, which is when he turned pro, can't have helped much. Coming in at number 4, we've got the opposite end of the spectrum now, the oldest ever world champion. Obviously, there can only be one oldest ever world champion, so I can't list off multiple names, so you could reword this to becoming world champion at 49 years of age, because that's what Bernard Hopkins did at light heavyweight when he outpointed Shumanov. This is a freakish achievement, and like I said, it happened as recently as 2014, so only just over 10 years ago. And I think recent achievements are considerably more impressive considering the level of opposition naturally gets better in sports as the years go on. To put this into perspective, the next oldest champion was George Foreman when he beat Michael Moorer in 1994 at the age of 46. And not to take anything away from George Foreman, but it's usually easier to fight at heavyweight when you're older due to the skill discrepancy not being as big, and more often than not, having heavy equalizing power can get you out of trouble and win you fights. After George Foreman, the third oldest champion is Thulani Malinga, who was world champion at the age of 42, 7 years younger than Bernard Hopkins. So this emphasizes how incredible it is that Bernard Hopkins became world champion at 49, but he is a genetic freak that didn't even look like he was 40 years old, let alone nearly 50. Taking the bronze medal position at number 3, we've got retiring undefeated. Now, admittedly, retiring undefeated is a very broad achievement, and there have been many people that have achieved this. For example, Floyd Mayweather's 50-0 is in a completely different realm to Tony Jeffries,
former undefeated professional boxer.
And you could make an argument for being 50-0 as a standalone achievement in this list, but having a specific record was a bit too niche to include. Nonetheless, achieving a perfect record is something every boxer strives for when turning pro. Nobody wants to lose, but at the same time, being undefeated doesn't always equate to being the best. You also need to be fighting other top opposition. Obviously, in Mayweather's career, this absolutely was the case, and his undefeated record is without a doubt the best one out there, better than the likes of Andre Ward, Joe Calzaghe, and Rocky Marciano. So I personally think that adding context and looking at who you've beaten is more important than the status of having a perfect record. But obviously, if you gave a boxer the option of retiring 50-0 or 50-5, they're obviously going to go for the first one. And at the silver medal position, number 2, we've got being a 3-weight undisputed champion. Fighting for a world title is a lifetime achievement that many pros would sacrifice a limb for, let alone winning a world title. So to win every belt in your division is a completely different story. And then to do that again 2 more times in different divisions is just completely otherworldly. And I think we're not quite appreciating how crazy this is, because we are spoiled with the immense talent in this current era, and there is multiple undisputed champions with Crawford, Usyk, Inoue, and obviously a couple of weeks ago you would have said Canelo as well. Just so everyone's aware, this isn't normal. We are blessed with great talents, and because of this, I feel like being a 3-weight undisputed champion is going to be overlooked for Terence Crawford, and it shouldn't be. Technically, Crawford isn't the only person to achieve this accolade. Claressa Shields is also a 3-weight undisputed champion, but the level of opposition at the higher weight classes in women's boxing leaves a lot to be desired. And Henry Armstrong was also a 3-weight undisputed champion, but this was back in the late 1930s when there were only 2 recognised sanctioning bodies, the NBA and the NYSAC. Not to mention back then, people didn't know about nutrition or how to cut weight effectively. The amount of fighters that would come in over 5 pounds below the fighting limit is astonishing. So I'm not going to rain on the parade of boxing historians, but Terence Crawford's 3-weight undisputed run far surpasses Henry Armstrong's. There have been 15 2-weight undisputed champions, so it goes to show there is a big step up to become undisputed in that 3rd division. But one person that could still do it is Naoya Inoue if he moves up to featherweight, but I don't see him getting past Rafael Espinosa personally. But I'm going to pose a question to people now. Do you think it would have been more impressive if Crawford moved up to super middleweight and won the 4 belts from 4 different champions? Or do you think beating the undisputed champion to win all 4 is better because you've beaten the guy that has already beaten those guys? I'd just like to know everyone's opinions, so leave a comment. And taking the gold medal, the number 1 greatest achievement in boxing, it has to be becoming an 8-weight world champion. Becoming an 8-weight world champion is one of the rarest feats in boxing and has only been achieved by one man, Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. He won titles from flyweight all the way up to welterweight, which is a jump of 10 weight divisions. He actually skipped super flyweight and bantamweight. If he decided to fight in those weight classes and became a 10-weight world champion, I'm convinced that is something that would stand the test of time. And it's still possible that the accolade of being an 8-weight world champion is something that will never be replicated again, let alone beaten. Pacquiao's closest competitor is Oscar De La Hoya and Amanda Serrano, who are also 6-weight world champions. De La Hoya actually achieved this feat in 2004, 5 years before Pacquiao did, and Serrano is still active, but she would need to go up to welterweight to win a title in a new weight class, and with Lauren Price and Michaela Mayer as the current champions, I can't see that happening anytime soon. The only other recent possibility for anyone to equal this is if Terence Crawford moves up to light heavyweight and beat Dmitry Bivol and then drop back down into middleweight to win a world title there, and then move back down again to win a title at super welterweight, which is obviously completely ridiculous and pretty much impossible, which goes to show how freakishly incredible Pacquiao's achievement is. Thank you very much for getting this far and watching all the way to the end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know your top 10 boxing achievements in the comments below.